Welcome to High Noon, where we talk about controversial subjects with interesting people. And there's nobody more interesting than who I'm pleased to have on with me this week, Peachy Keenan, who is an anonymous warrior, and what I'm going to call her is a converted Gen X suburban wine mom turned base domestic queen. How do you like? How's that for a title? She's a contributing editor at the American Mind. She's the author of the forthcoming manifesto Domestic Extremist, out in June. She's also one of my all-time favorite writers. She's also, as I just mentioned, anonymous. So for those of you who watch the YouTube videos, that's why this one is, well, not a YouTube video. But through the magic of the microphone, I'm pleased to say welcome, Peachy Keenan, to High Noon.
Hello, Inez. Thank you so much. I love your nickname for me.
You can put that on your book as your author
It'll.
profile.
Are you kidding? It'll be on my tombstone.
So how did you get from
Ah,
a previously described sort of normie positions to being where you are today, which is with a dedicated reading audience, and Twitter audience for your domestic extremism?
yes, my journey to domestic extremism. It's I just say I wasn't born like this. I was definitely made. The journey is long and winding. So, I was groomed to be a very secular, basic, mainstream feminist all through private school and my quote unquote elite college education, along with all of my peers. And I never imagined that I would one day be, a devout Catholic, happily married, and a mother to many children. Um, with my shit posting side hustle on Twitter. you could never have convinced me this is where I would end up. But I think it was a long, a slow process of, being red pilled first politically, from being a kind of basic, not totally apolitical lib. And then finally, the feminism fell from my eyes right around the time that I met my husband and started kind of making this sort of big giant mental shift from, being a random single person in her 20s to like, oh, wait a second. I do want a family. I do want a marriage. How do I put that together? So that happened, fortunately for me, and worked out. But a lot of people it doesn't. So I really do feel like, and I say this in my book, I escaped feminism by the skin of my teeth.
um, you talk about actually coming to basically Catholicism through politics, right? Which is something that,
Mhm.
or at least that your
It's true.
political conversion preceded your religious conversion. There's been a bunch of sort of
That's true.
consternation around some of the that exact sort of pathway that's happening here. I'm thinking of the New York Times article that lamented that the hottest club in New York City is the Catholic
Right.
Church.
Right.
That was the headline, right? It seems like for a lot of folks, they're proceeding. Essentially, they're rejecting the modern politics and modern feminism and a lot of these isms that are put in front of us, and they're ending up at sort of the world's largest and oldest, still organized, still functioning religious organization. I mean, how were those two things connected, and why did you end up where you are?
Yeah, that's so interesting. That article, the whole dime square trend of making Catholicism this cool hop and night spot. For me, it was a little different, and I think, the first step towards that. I mean, I grew up a very hardcore secular atheist. Both of my parents were totally rejected religion. We had like a Christmas tree, but our only God was Santa, and Rudolph was his messenger. Like we were not, never set foot in a church, nothing, or any kind of religious ceremony of any kind. And so I think the first step was for me transforming really from like a militant pro-choice person to someone who realized, oh, that is actually not my position. Like maybe could I be pro-life? That was really, abortion was really the issue that kind of tipped me into maybe being open to some kind of religious identity, which my entire life, my first 30 years of my life was anathema. I could never, I wanted nothing to do with religion. But when I made the change, with the biggest leap of all, really, for me, was from pro-choice to pro-life. And after that, it sort of fell into place. I still took me a long time till I actually like had a conversion, like did RCIA at the local terrible woke liberal parish, with the openly gay priest, who was a lovely man, but he was basically Liberace in a cassock, and I persevered. And I think that just, once you start down the road of realizing the truth about abortion, at least for me, there was really no escaping my end up as a traditional Roman Catholic.
It's interesting because one of the things that seems to characterize our age so strongly, and particularly the last couple years, is this collapse in institutional kind of messaging and faith, right? Leaving aside sort of the Catholic Church as an alternate institution for a moment, here I'm thinking about when you say that you were sort of a default lib, but like an apolitical one, right? I think what
Totally.
that actually means is that you just passively accept the kind of messages that seem to be swimming in the ether, whether that's coming out of Hollywood as an institution or coming out of, successful corporations and corporate culture as an institution, universities as an institution. And a lot of people are just sort of passively accept those things. And I feel like the last couple years, really the dam starting to break in 2016 with Trump's election. But I think even more so for a lot of folks who might have been a little bit more passively left, the last couple years have just been kind of an avalanche of proof that nothing works the way that we sort of trusted that it would, that the medical institutions failed us, and the CDC has failed us, and the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the military, like, that we assumed was competent. They made a disaster out of this withdrawal, right? In a pure competency basis. Did that factor in at all to your? It seems like you've had a little longer of a transition on sort of being open to these ideas, but I really only remember your sort of acerbic wit asserting itself very strongly in the last 2 years, where you started to really critique some of these institutions.
That's a good question. I think that part of it is, as a Catholic and as a convert, you become very aware that the institution that you're kind of like pledging your soul to is completely corrupt from the top down. It is, besides even the all the child sexual molestation, that this institution is, wow, what's going on here? And you start pulling back at the rug, and what have I believed in all these years? And so I think for me, I think that started for me, I think after 9/11, I'm ashamed to admit it now, but I became just like a full-throated neocon. And I was like, yes, we have to get Saddam. And then as that all fell apart, I started to realize, wait a second, what was I for here? Like, what were they doing? Why did all these soldiers die? And why are they all killing themselves when they come home from the war? But then when Trump came along, he really just did us all a favor by pulling up the rug, and we could just see what was under there for the first time. And that was just, to this day, I'm just blown away by how long I spent believing in, that our overlords have our best interests at heart. They know what they're doing. They're the experts. My children need every vaccine that my pediatrician recommends. I would never have questioned any of those things until their failures became suddenly exposed, slowly over Trump. And then all at once with the pandemic. It was really unbelievable to watch the real-time exposure of all these institutions. It's just like a bunch of like slightly creepy, not that competent, sort of slimy people. Everyone from, in every head of every government institution, big pharma. And like what they're doing, I mean, we want to talk about big pharma for a second, as they're pushing us into vaccines that may or may not be effective. They did or didn't test that well, may or may not have all these bad side effects, but they're also actively trying to get other shots into little kids that will, shrink their testicles and render them infertile for life. And so all of these things, I mean, what conclusion can you draw but that we're on our own fully? No one has our back, not the Pope, not the president, not the head of the Department of Defense, not the people selling us our medicines. They don't have our best interests at heart. And in fact, do they have any, what are they trying to do here? And it just became a funny joke in my house of like, Alex Jones was right. There really is a war on for our minds. Like, what? And so the more you think about it, and obviously if you're very online, which I wasn't until around 2015, but then once you kind of go deeper and deeper, there's no bottom.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth on this more fundamental thing, but I mean, for me, I thought I was already pretty cynical about our institutions, especially post 2015, 2016. But I was kind of a dupe during the early part of the pandemic, and I'm still not
Same.
sure what's right, I'm still not sure whether, COVID, for example, has gotten that much milder over time and it was serious in the beginning, or like, and I'm still not sure, I don't think anybody can be like very certain about the sort of relative merits or risks anymore of the vaccine that I took. Right. It seems like an impossible task to actually be able to support or to suss out. I mean, people talk about quote unquote doing the research, but I almost feel like we've reverted to a earlier and less sophisticated version of civilization where we don't get to rely on knowledge that is more than 1 degree of separation from us, right? Where, like, I don't know, I think about sort of earlier iterations of civilization where, I mean, one of the most important things that human beings have been able to do, and what's one of the things that's enabled us to really conquer the planet in a sense, in terms of as a species, has been to be able to retain and teach knowledge and then institutionalize it, right? So that like not everybody has to invent the wheel from scratch. We learn it from previous generations, and then we also learn from people who are concurrently living with us, but they can have like one expertise and we can have a different expertise, and we can kind of vet all this knowledge through institutions and disseminate it. And I almost feel like I no longer know anything because I have to do everything from scratch, and some of these things really do require expertise. It requires expertise to be able to read a medical study, for example. It is not something that just a smart person with an open mind can really put together. Like, you do need some form of expertise for that, but I don't know where to turn for that kind of trusted expertise. It seems like as you just said, there's no bottom to it.
You turn to Twitter, Inez. That's what I do.
Elon Musk says it's going to be the most trusted form of information.
I'm all for it. Yeah, I mean, they politicized, facts. They started doing that with the Iraq War, post 9/11, with Trump. The politicization of facts and information, withholding some things that don't, fit their narrative, pushing other, it is an impossible task to know, like, well, wait, okay, so like, do I vaccinate my children for all this stuff? Do I not? What does my doctor's telling me one thing, but I'm not sure. It's been, and look at obviously education in school. What do they learn? What are they learning history? Are they learning history filtered through, 10 layers of DEI administrators or whatever? I mean, I am a person who grew up, I have a parent who is a doctor. I am a world-class hypochondriac. I believe in medicine. I grew up, my children have all their normal vaccinations. I like being healed by medicine. That is how I was, raised. And so it was, with COVID, I mean, that was, I was like you, I was an early overreactor. We even sprayed our vegetables, in January, February 2020. We we had masks, you know, like the crazy ones with the pink, whatever filters on the sides. Like we were like, we're ahead of the curve here. We know what's coming. You guys, you fools don't even know. And obviously that was like a huge overreaction based on, you know, the videos that we were seeing early coming out. But yeah, there is nowhere, you know, there is no definitive quote source. And what I think one thing we can all agree on is that credentialed journalists are not the source anymore. Like they're not what they were. And that's hard. I think that's the hardest, obviously, for the boomers to deal with, that, you know, the Walter Cronkite voice of sanity and reason, that's, you know, that's vaporized. We don't have that. And so you pick and choose who you I don't know who you want to believe, who you do believe, but I definitely feel like I do think the left right now, you know, owns this because of just the pure obfuscation of what the effects are of what they've done, like what lockdowns do. Do masks work? You know, puberty blockers are totally reversible and don't cause any problems. I mean, that's all bullshit. So I do think that right now, if you had to pick who to trust more, I mean, I would say, you know, you can trust me and you.
I don't know. That's the whole problem. I don't know. It's not even just like there are people I trust not to lie to me, but there are things that require something more than not lying, right? But I mean, you pointed out this is potentially generational, right? I do think that it's going to be much more difficult for people who didn't grow up on the internet to sort of balance or try to find sources that are trustworthy versus that aren't sort of institutionally captured. I mean, you've seen the polls on your generation, on Gen X, right? That apparently Gen X is going to be the most conservative generation voting.
Oh yeah, I saw
currently.
that. Amazing.
Yeah, it's why do you think that is? Why is Gen X sort of finally stepping up to the plate?
We made it.
You guys are kind of finally coming out of your I don't care, this is for losers stupor.
That's right.
And asserting yourselves politically. Why do you think that is?
I really don't know. I thought about this a lot, but I do think it's just, you know, the stereotype of Gen X being ultra cynical is real. Like we just do not trust authority. I mean, I think that attitude probably didn't serve me well in college or like with my various jobs. Like it just, you know, a lot of eye rolling at what they were asking of me, my professors and my bosses, but it's serving us well now. I think it's serving us very well, just this very deep cynicism about kind of received authority. And that is turning into like a great superpower for us, that we're not just, you know, TikTok can't really break through to us like the way it can to Gen Z. You know, we're just sort of like born to question, like who do these people think they are? And so I think that attitude has to somehow, it's a survival attitude right now. And so I think that people, you know, quote, question everything. Well, that's like a liberal thing, but I think now it's like your life depends on questioning it. And, you know, and the other great superpower that we have is that none of us had, you know, saw a smartphone or heard the word internet until we were like in our early or mid 20s. I remember, you know, senior year of college, one of the professors announced, kids, I have an email address. You guys can email me. And I remember looking at the email address going like what? I went back to my apartment. And this is senior year of college. And I was staring at my little, like, whatever, Apple IIe computer. And I remember looking and thinking like, wait a second, like, where does the like email come in? Is it through the like electrical cord? Like I couldn't figure out how does the data get into the box? I had no information. You know, I'm a word cell. Okay, sorry. And so that, but not having access to any of that shit until we were, well into adulthood, really, I mean, we're the only generation that had that break, that had that early life free from technology, and then like suddenly thrown into the mosh pit. And unfortunately, or I mean, there's no way in terms of like kids today on the internet. I mean, that toothpaste is so far out of the tube. Limit their screen time. Okay, good luck with that one. You can try. And obviously we do try that. But yeah, we have Gen X is I've always had faith in Gen X. I've never thought this is just a bunch of losers. They'll never amount to anything. I mean, it always seemed very obvious that where the boomers failed, where the millennials kind of like, I don't know what's wrong with them. We're the last sort of voice of sanity, is my point. Like totally, like total voice of sanity. It's like us and the 16-year-olds. I'm not kidding. That's it.
Yeah. When you said cynical, I actually associate cynicism not only with Gen X, but with Gen Z. First of all, I really think millennials are
because we're raising them.
Yeah. But I really think of millennials as sort of the quintessential good student, like dorks, I think my generation just imbibed everything direct from sort of the boomer teat, and all of the sort of self-actualizing, change the world nonsense that, sort of bad on the boomer generation, that they were still, they were still attached to that kind of philosophy, even as they had and raised children, right? But I think millennials were essentially the good students. They think of themselves as rebellious. I think we were the least rebellious generation in sort of pop culture history. We were the bring an apple to your teacher generation, except the teacher was telling us that America was racist and evil, so we just repeated that stuff, know. Right. So yeah, I think
conforming with each other.
We're the earnest generation, not the cynical one, and you might be right. That might be a dangerous trait these days.
That's so true. Yeah, the earnest generation. Yeah, it's funny how it seems to skip around. Like the boomers, like earnestly believed in, the justification of like serving 20 years in Vietnam, yay! And then we were like, no, no, please no. And then you guys, more earnest generation, and now with the Zoomers, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I think, oh, the Zoomers they're so based. They're so, wow, they're just like us. But then I see statistics that 48% of Zoomers don't know their gender. Half of all Zoomers, have 75 different pronouns. So then I worry. But the Zoomers that I know, like I'm talking about the teenagers, I mean, these are good. These are good kids. The one, I guess, the ones I know are not maybe the regular normal Zoomers. These are like, good Catholic kids. They're based as hell. And so it gives me a little hope that they're just like us. They're going to make it.
I think we're just going to see a huge divergence. It's going to be like bimodal, right? The response to this. It's just things have gotten so crazy that there's going to be a certain percentage of people who just roll their eyes at it, right? I mean, it's really hard not to roll your eyes at some of this stuff when they're announcing that it's endangering trans people to point out that two sexes exist. These are eye-rolling, sort of reality-defying things, and it makes sense to me that a sort of teenage rebellion would focus on rolling their eyes at the people who are most stuffy and easily offended. That used to be church ladies, and now it's woke ladies, but I still think it's really hard. I think indoctrination works, man. I've had this discussion with a lot of people because they say what you just did. Oh, I talked to a lot of my kids' friends or whatever, and they don't seem to buy this at all. I think that's kind of a confirmation bias. I'd like to be wrong, but I think it's confirmation bias. I think if you look at those surveys, I think indoctrination works. You don't really question the worldview that's been spoon-fed to you since kindergarten. Even if, and that's kind of beyond individual traits, right? You could have a sort of cynical orientation towards any given sort of piece of this puzzle, but fundamentally the baseline that you see the world through is going to be one, that America's bad, that, that there is no such thing as meritocracy, that, there is unconscious bias in your soul, or whatever. And I think those things are really, really hard to undo. And they're also really easy to teach. Because that's the other objection that I get is like, oh, why would you think the schools are any better at teaching wokeism than they are at teaching math? And the answer is it's really easy to teach someone to repeat a slogan. It's really hard to do calculus. I don't know.
Right. And there's no virtue attached to learning calculus or being good at calculus, but there is enormous virtue attached to parroting the correct slogans and being on the right side of that issue and being with the cool kids. The cool kids now are not the ones with the mohawks smoking cigarettes. They're the cool kids are the ones who are in absolute lockstep conformity with the most, wildly left-wing teacher at the school. Those are the cool kids. And that's such a funny shift, to me. I wish John Hughes was here. He would make a great movie about, can you imagine the Breakfast Club now, like what those kids would look like? Like who would be in detention now? It'd be the kids who use the wrong pronoun on the teacher, and the principal would be just like a purple-haired, frog self or whatever, like the new pronoun is. It would be a great movie to remake. But what you just said about it being so easy to indoctrinate people, I think that everyone sort of is in their own cult. If you want to think about it that way, I mean, you can think about religion as a cult, conservatism as a cult, Trumpism as a cult, whatever. One of the reasons I actually wrote this book, which comes out in June, Domestic Extremist, was to try to deprogram people who were like me, who were in the cult of liberal feminism. And that really is what the book is. It is a manual on deprogramming you or someone from people from the cult, which you just breathe it in. Like I was never taught to be a feminist, or my parents were Reagan conservatives, but I did not follow their path because it wasn't kind of being taught to me. It was sort of like just, we were pretty apolitical. There was no religion. There was no guideposts really of any kind. So you just kind of breathe it in. You just absorb whatever your friends are doing. That's just and then you end up, next thing you know, you're like, you're like on Tinder or getting whatever 25 abortions or whatever is happening to you without even ever making that conscious decision. That's where you're going to end up. It just sort of happens to you. And the only way out is to take active steps out, because the culture will just suck you into that vortex if you don't. The only way to escape it is to just swim really hard the other way. You have to survive. And that really is what the book is about. Like how I escaped the swirling vortex and how you can also.
What would some of those concrete steps be? Because I agree with you. I think it's the default. And I speaking from even a personal perspective, like I think it's really difficult to sort of wrench your life out of a particular track, and do something that is completely different that you never really imagined. That's something that like you can kind of think about or even ideologically commit to, and but truly returning is first of all, is it possible? And second of all, I mean, what concrete things would you tell people in order to pull themselves out of that current?
Yeah, exactly. There can be no return. Like it's over. It's done. We can never go back to the past. Some aspects of the past, we don't want to return to. I like having a washing machine. I enjoy, earning money. Those are all good things that women have. No one wants us, dying of bubonic plague. So the concrete things I talk about in the book basically are, the simple things, but they're not easy things. And the biggest shift, the biggest shift happens without really taking any actual step or doing something. It just has to happen in your mind. You have to make a conscious decision one day, Like, okay, look at my life. Why aren't I happy? Like, why am I taking 3 antidepressants? Why do I rely on, why do I need anti-anxiety pills? Why can't I find what I want? Which is, if you look deep in your heart, is probably going to be, true love of some kind, in some kind of relationship. Why aren't I getting that? Why aren't I able to achieve these things? I was told they were not necessary. Marriage was optional. I don't need those things. I need to be free to explore. But I have been doing that for 15 years and I am not happy. And so the first step is really accepting that maybe there's a better way. And if you can possibly make that leap, whether you're a man or a woman, I mean, I wrote this book for everyone who has found themselves in this situation. The first thing you need to do is sort of say goodbye to the things that you have been told were fine. Starting with, let's say, promiscuous sex, like, random dating, like whoever, whatever, anyone who comes by, like, sure, having standards in your life for yourself. And, we're not all going to be, pitch a perfect game, like, save yourself for marriage. Like, I understand that is something that's really, reserved for like the very young traditional Catholics and other people in like religious communities. But if you can sort of make the shift to that lifestyle, to that mindset of like saving intimacy for someone who loves you and not accepting, especially as a woman, not accepting less than that. Like, that's something I can never get my head around. Like, why are you willing to do all of this for someone who doesn't care about you, doesn't love you, maybe likes you, in terms of like dating and, all the apps. It's really sad. And I keep reading these stories that are coming out in like Vox and the New York Times about, the 10-year anniversary of Tinder, and the stories from the women who literally got on Tinder like when it first launched, and they're like 10 years later still on Tinder. Like, what was the point of Tinder? Was it to like find a boyfriend and fall in love? Or was it simply to absorb like excess, male sexual needs? Like, I'm not sure what that business model is, but whatever it was good because it has all these return customers. They never get off Tinder because you can't ever get off Tinder. And so just starting with thinking about your life in a way that is, more domestically extreme, as I put it. In other words, being more domestic in general, looking to yourself, building a home, a life, a family for yourself, versus just looking for the culture to do that for you, is really, you can't proceed to the next steps without those two first things.
I'm curious because I sometimes feel this way. It's funny, like, I'm 34 and, definitely not as hot as I was when I was 24, right? Like
You're very hot, Inez. Inez, you're very hot.
I expected to, I expected to feel in some way jealous of 25-year-olds, right? I think that's kind of natural, right? Like, as a woman, you're vain, you're whatever. And instead I feel like I'm looking at people who are, let's say, in their mid-20s, and I'm so grateful that I'm not 25 right now, and I think that's so unnatural. Like, I think the natural thing is to, like, being 25 is great, like objectively great, right, in a lot of ways. But I'm wondering how you feel about when you look at 25-year-olds today. Do you feel like jealousy, to that kind of natural jealousy, like, oh, that was a good time in life, I'd like to return to it? Because I look around and I'm like, oh my God, I got the last chopper out of Saigon. Like, there's
yes, I believe
like,
that.
Yeah. I'm almost sad about the fact that I cannot feel jealousy about this. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
right. I think because you're still very young, you're not jealous of 25-year-olds yet, but just wait. Just wait till you have a few milestone birthdays, and then you'll be looking at the 25-year-olds and be like,
Those damn bitches.
No, I mean, I think that's the natural impulse, right? But like,
Yeah.
it seems like really
Oh yeah, their
lonely,
lifestyle.
like,
Yeah, their
much
lifestyle is bad.
lonelier than when I was 25. So that's almost 10 years ago, right? Like, it
Mhm.
seems much lonelier even than, you know that song, "No One Likes You When You're 23," right? Like, it seems like no one likes anyone at all in their 20s, and they're all like anxious and posting and like in various, but they don't talk to each other, they don't flirt with each other, they don't have like any actual personal interaction that doesn't first come out of a very rigorous sort of set of check boxes, right? Like, we've siloed ourselves on the internet so extremely that people don't interact in a fun way anymore. And
So
I
true.
keep repeating this anecdote, but I have a bartender friend who's been bartending for 15 years, and she said guys do not approach women anymore in bars. That like doesn't happen. And I'm wondering what it looks like to be in your 20s when that doesn't happen.
That's so sad. That's the wages of Me Too, right? You can't flirt. Flirting is rape. And our population is plummeting because of that. Like we've got to get the 25-year-old men and the 25-year-old women, or well, I guess they could be 28-year-old men, okay, a little older. We've got to get them in a room together and pour them some drinks and have them flirt because honestly, we need a baby boom. And the fact that and the thing is that girls have been taught, the male gaze is bad. Like I dress for myself. And yet, no, that is a total lie. You women want and need, heterosexual women want and need young male affirmation. They need that. And they're not getting it in real life because men are, I don't know if they're, porn addicts or they've just been kind of terrified. They don't want to get arrested. They don't want to get cuffed at the bar if they like hit on you, right? So they're not making the move. And the women are instead swiping on their apps, and which is like, so we've discussed like what gets missed on a digital profile that you're not going to get in real life with someone interacting with someone. And it's so depressing. I don't know how to, I think that culture is slowly coming back. I mean, obviously with the pandemic, we had like 3 years off of that. And I'm not saying like, Coachella festival culture is like the way to go, like to save the culture. I don't think so. But we've got to find a way to get like young, fertile, attractive men and women in like a flirty zone with each other. That's, wholesome, not like depraved. And is it possible? Like, I don't know. I hope so, because we need it to happen. We need it to happen badly. But I will say one of the things about 25-year-olds, if I may, is that I was just discussing with someone the outrageous level of facial enhancements that now 25-year-old women are getting, which used to be reserved for like, the old ladies like me in our 40s. Suddenly these beautiful young women are walking around with like, the just giant lips, and they're presenting themselves in a way that ages them and really gives off this sort of very uncanny valley, perfect vibe, especially here in LA, obviously. And I think that is a huge turnoff to like normal people. Do you see you must see a lot of that in New York.
Well, I've been told that the thing in New York is to make sure that your uncanny valley isn't uncanny, right? Like I've even seen there's something called like the New York version of whatever plastic surgeries are being done in LA is toned down by about 80%. So it's
Right.
not that women, I'm sure women are doing it here, but it's not like you don't walk around very often seeing like people who look like their faces have been rearranged. No,
Unless it got beat up on the subway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true, sadly. No, but I do think this all fits together, right? Because something stuck with me. A friend of mine said about her, the kids in her daughter's class, that a lot of the girls were wearing masks even after the school had dropped it. And at first she thought it was because they were afraid of COVID. But it turned out it was because they, after 2 years of basically being entirely digital and being able to manipulate their appearance in all interactions with people and be quote unquote their like best digital hottest self, that they were afraid to show their faces, their real faces, to the boys in their class, because they figured that all the boys think that they look like how they looked on like Snapchat or on Instagram.
Oh, right, with the filters, the lips
Yep.
filters. Wow, that is so. I mean, I get it. I mean, that's so sad, but female vanity is not helped by all those filters, which if that's all you're looking at every day and that's what you want to present to the world, yeah, I mean, reality is going to be a big bummer for you.
Don't you worry about that in general? I mean, we're talking about in the context of 25-year-olds flirting with each other, but like, or even 16-year-olds, but don't you worry that in general, like real life will not have enough appeal as currently constituted to fend off a totally digital life? I mean, like, I think it's pretty clear that like, that that real life, I think it's kind of an obvious take that real life is worth living. But then I think about people whose real lives really are this like quasi-digital space where they don't interact a lot with other people face to face, especially after the last 2 years. You got more and more people who, are what we would have called in the past life agoraphobic, and completely awkward and unable to interact in real time with other human beings. I mean, don't you worry that those people will just retreat into the metaverse? I mean, it'll just be a more elaborate version of those girls who don't want to show their real faces because real life doesn't seem as appealing as the way they can present themselves with filters. I mean, imagine just being able to interact in a more like 3D virtual way, where you get to choose all those things. I mean, how do we sell the imperfection of life? Because that's what I feel like the position we're in now. We have to sell them on the imperfection of and suffering and tragedy of real life.
Right. No, that's such a that's such a great point. I mean, fortunately, I have sabotaged the metaverse, and so that will be going away very soon. You're welcome, America. I have crashed that. I mean, that looked like, just a total, no one wants to be a part of that. And I think that there is a little bit of glimmer of hope. At least I hear from my kids. They just think all of that is so cringe. Having like an avatar, like running around, like talking to other avatars. They think it's ridiculous. They don't want any part of it. My younger kids do play a kind of avatar-y game called Roblox, which is like these little blocky avatars talking to each other about, I don't even know what, making little jokes to each other. But those are just like video game things. I really don't think that that the full virtual, VR headset, like the tactile haptic bodysuit, world will come about in the way that some people like have these dire predictions that we'll just be in our pods and we'll just be, fed nutrients through tubes while we, type or whatever. Because I think that there is seems like a movement a little bit away from that, like the whole touch grass, and all this stuff, that my teenagers know about all that stuff. I mean, they're very online too. They chat, whatever, Discord, it's pretty wholesome. I do check it. Don't worry. But they seem to be, their favorite thing is to hang out with their friends, which is what all teenagers throughout history, American teenagers want most of all to be hanging out with their friends. And so that gives me some hope that they will never miss a party. They will want to go and hang out at each other's houses. They come over to my house. So I don't think the whole virtual, world is going to affect them as much if you can get them kind of social, demented and sad, but social, to quote The Breakfast Club. If you can get them socializing early, and there's fun that you cannot replicate. you know, as fun as it is to talk to you here, I'm sure we'd be having an even better time if we were in person, you know, over drinks or whatever. And the people who are stuck, who kind of have still stuck in that pandemic mindset, I just read something like someone had never left the house since early 2020, like just had their first dinner out somewhere, like some like, I don't know, CAA agent or something. And I was like, that's just like, what is that? There are people who will never come back from the isolation, the digital isolation of that. And, you know, what can you do? You can break their door down, you know, force them out. But if that's just where they're going to go, I mean, it's a loss, I guess. But I don't know what you can do. You can just, you know, I guess our only hope is like an EMP, you know, to just wipe it all out. You know, that would probably suck, but it would be one solution.
And now we know how Peachy crashed Meta.
That was a joke. I have nothing to do with that. I don't know anything about technology, so I could never do it.
We are joking. Before we wrap up here, I mean, what we've been talking about, sort of the response of the kids, largely defined as people all the way through our 20s, as we want to do. The older we get, the broader the kids, quote unquote, seems to get. Actually, my husband always tells us a funny story about his great grandma, who always said, you know, where are the kids, to refer to her 80-year-old kids.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yep.
you can always be a kid to somebody.
That's true.
But we've generally been talking about sort of the younger generations. What has been the response to your writing from sort of your demographic, which it seems like, as we kind of said, there seems to be this mass Gen X rebellion that's bubbling up in a lot of the school board meetings. At least on the Republican side, there are lots of Gen X kind of rising stars in the Republican Party. In fact, most of the rising stars of the Republican Party. Whereas Democrats seem to be skipping straight to like AOC and millennials, which makes perfect sense.
That's what a great observation. Yeah, so true.
Yeah. I mean, what has the response been from your own kind?
It's funny. I mean, I do get a lot of comments from people, you know, a lot of MAGA moms. The boomers love me. My mother always sends my articles to her friends, you know, who don't know that I'm, you know, her daughter, because I'm obviously anonymous. And they're, you know, super into it. And I do get a lot of like nice DMs from parents who are like, you know, seem to be, you know, have had similar experiences, similar observations, women and men. You know, but it's funny. I just heard from, I'm in a group chat with some like, you know, very base ladies. And one of them told me that a friend of hers read an essay I wrote for the American Mind, where I have a regular column, and said that because of my essay, which I think it was the one called "Kin in the Game," which was about like, you know, have babies. She decided to marry her boyfriend, quit her job, and have babies, and now has a baby, like because of this thing I wrote, which is like so wild. And, you know, all those little peachies out there getting born because of me. So I think that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm like I'm a nano celebrity. I mean, I have a relatively small following. But based on the messages I've gotten from people, like, I think there is an audience for a parent, a mom, a conservative, a Catholic, who is able to put these things in a way that is, I don't know, readable and maybe sometimes fun. You know, the medicine goes down easier with sugar. And so it's been great experience for me to, like, you know, quit writing for the Borg, which I did for many years, and finally, you know, let my freak flag fly, as they say.
That is the most Gen X saying. But have you found that, like, I guess, do you think that this is going to be more than, do you think this is going to catch on as more, because we're talking about the bimodal, right, response of Gen Z. I mean, it seems like we have a pretty narrow window for your generation to put things right. And that's kind of how I think about these things now. I feel like millennials are the first truly indoctrinated and really dedicated generation to the new sort of the new regime. If we wait until millennials are taking over the C-suites and running in larger and larger numbers for office and et cetera, right? You know, even if we do a lot of things to stop the pipeline on the other end and create, what is it they used to call rush babies? You can call them peachy babies. On the other end, I mean, is this going to turn into like a generational warfare between millennials and Gen X? Because if it's so, unfortunately, we're a lot bigger than you. Our generation's huge.
Correct. It is going to be a war. We're already in it. I don't mean a Cold War. It's not, I don't think we'll be killing each other. But yeah, there's no escaping that conflict. We're absolutely in like an existential, even like a civilizational crisis moment. Absolutely. Culturally. And if we don't pull our heads out of our asses, it's over. I mean, and it almost is. Basically, like, that's your black pill of the day. It is almost over. And, part of why I wrote this book was like a last ditch effort. Like, let's pull those irons out of those. Like, let's pull defeat from the jaws, like as right now, this is our moment. And we still can win. And I think we have to win. Part of what, part of my whole strategy, obviously, to this is that we can outbreed the our enemies, because the millennials, many of them, and Gen X have self-selected for genetic dead ends. They are aborting all their babies. They're on lifetime birth control. And so if they never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. So if I can convince a few more people to maybe have an extra kid or two, in a generation or two, where are our numbers? Now, I mean, maybe this is all just like total fantasy. And I don't like to tell people you must have a child. I really don't care. Like, everyone can live their life. But I think that we have to get a few more fertile people to decide to go for it and have maybe one extra kid or two, and then we have a chance. But yeah, if we don't, you guys win. The millennials win. We'll surrender. We'll have we'll be at the guillotine, begging forgiveness, as we're like thrown out of polite society. Totally. I hope that day doesn't come, but I don't know.
Before I let you go, I wanted, since we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, people are going out to vote. I'm going to vote after this. And this, probably by the time this releases at noon tomorrow, we still won't know the results of the election.
Not for weeks. For weeks.
So what are, in that spirit, what are your predictions? I will close out with that. How do you think this is going to go? I mean, obviously, I don't want to be coy about it. Obviously, people are predicting a big night for the Republican Party, but there's kind of a range of outcomes here. Do you think it's going to be like huge, or do you think it's going to be kind of, okay, we're rebuking the party in power, but perhaps not the army of marching Peachy Keenan moms that is hoped for in certain Republican quarters?
Don't worry, I'll have them marching by 2024. I promise. Yeah, so I think there is a huge red wave. The sentiment is there. Yesterday above the 101 freeway in Hollywood, there was a group of like young Latino guys holding a Rick Caruso sign. And for LA, he's running for mayor of LA. He's the quote Republican. He says he's a Democrat, but he's actually a longtime Republican. Katy Perry posted that she just voted for Rick Caruso. His opponent is the Obama communist, like an open communist Obama lackey, Karen Bass. So there is even hope in LA. People have had it with everything top to bottom. Now, however, I will say what I thought the morning of Trump's election 2016, I had bet money on Trump. I knew he would win. I tried to tell people this is a sure thing. He was going to win. But I thought that afternoon I had this sudden panic where I realized, okay, if the powers that be, if they knew what I knew, that he was going to win, they would be cheating more. Because we've always known, look, there is cheating on the left. We've known this for years, dead people voting. This is just a common, they cheated the margins. I don't really know anything about it. I'm not like a big stop the steal person. I was not there on January 6th, whatever. But there's always been some like stuff going on, like shady stuff. So I thought that day, okay, he'll win if they don't think he's going to win. And so he did win. They were not, I knew, going to make the same mistake twice. There were shenanigans on 2020. There were, quote, burst pipes. There was 3 a.m. ballot dumps. There was no transparency. I have no idea what actually happened. I don't know one way or the other. I think there's a very good chance that things like that are going to be happening in certain precincts. Philadelphia, Maricopa, I don't know, Georgia. There's already talk on the internet. It's like noon here in California that there's machines down. I don't know. So I'm feeling really good about it. I certainly hope that we can pull off the Senate and the House for sure. But look, if we wake up tomorrow and John Fetterman has won and Blake Masters has lost, that will be, I say, hey, bring on the recession. We deserve it.
Well, hopefully with Katy Perry's assets on our side, we cannot fail. So, Peachy Keenan, thank you so much for coming on High Noon. You can read her work over at The American Mind, and please do pre-order her book, Domestic Extremist. It's coming out in June, but those pre-orders really, really help authors. If you're not aware of sort of the publishing side, publishers love to see high pre-orders for books. So go order her book, Domestic Extremist, anywhere you order such things, including the big evil Amazon. So, Peachy, thank you so much for coming on High Noon.
Thank you so much, Inez. This was a lot of fun.
And thank you to our listeners. High Noon with Inez Stepman is a production of the Independent Women's Forum. We also have other productions such as At the Bar, which is a podcast I do with my colleague, Jennifer Buceris. We're going to do a Supreme Court big case sort of download this week. So check in for that at the Bar. And also we have a second podcast called She Thinks for IWF. And that is host Beverly Hallberg, and she does more like sort of day-to-day politics, like lots of interesting politicians and policy wonks and people who know what they're talking about. So please do check those out. As always, you can send comments and questions to inez.stepman@iwf.org. Please help us out by hitting the subscribe button and leaving us a comment or review on Apple Podcasts, Acast, Google Play, YouTube, at iwf.org. Be brave, and we'll see you next time on High Noon.